Okay, it's warming up. Okay, we are now live on Facebook and LinkedIn. So we're joined today by Ted Faunce from Hangzhou, China. Ted was for 11 years the headmaster of Chinese International School in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's top secondary school or primary and secondary school. Before that, he was the head of the American section of Lycee International at St Germain-en-Laye. And prior to that, the peak of his career, of course, he was my French teacher. But Ted, in other words, has a huge amount of experience in education internationally and thinking about all the challenges of education, and in particular, a lot of the challenges that were faced in Hong Kong. What happens when you have swine flu coming through? What happens when you have SARS coming back through? So he's done a lot of thinking about life or school in the time of pandemic, but also has some great, interesting thoughts about what the impact that this pandemic will have on education afterwards. And he's right now involved in advising two very high-profile school projects in China, the Yungu School in Hangzhou, which is, of course, chaired by Jack Ma, and the Avenues World School in Shenzhen. So, Ted, first of all, currently, what are we learning about education? What are the biggest learnings about education in the time of pandemic that we've got right now, coming out of the challenge of this switch over to homeschooling that everybody suddenly had?
Thanks, Tom. And I have to tell everybody that for better or for worse, Tom's French improved a lot more after he moved to Paris and after he had me as a French teacher. So I claim no credit for your excellent French. With all of the misery and all of the chaos, I'm actually very optimistic about this crisis, which is a shock to the system on all levels, having potentially some very salutary effects. I mean, for me, the bottom line is that it will provoke change. And for any of you who have been involved in the education world in the last 20, 25 years, you know that it's become worse than a cliche to say that compared with all other industries, education and school in particular have been largely impervious to change. And so I'll start with online learning, and it's going to take years for everyone to unpack the varied lessons of online and experiences of online learning, good, bad, and ugly, in the years ahead. But in fact, schools we've been talking about online and blended learning for a long time. Yes, there was SARS, whatever year that was, 2004, 2004. But that's the dark ages for anything digital. And so now, I think that it is a kind of day of reckoning, which will take a long time to sort of see where we go. Now, it can go, in terms of the online learning bit, it can go in one of two directions, or a mixture of the two. On the pessimistic side, especially for fee-paying schools, where parents are paying fees, and there are a lot of questions going on now about refunds and what this school year means. I just heard today that in all likelihood the New York schools will be closed, public schools anyway, will be closed until the end of the school year and open in September. That's a public system, but of parents, if the child has had a sort of not so great experience with online learning, saying, why would I want to pay more for more of that, right? But there's so
it will cause a crisis for the fee-paying schools, in other words, where they will.
Well, I think I was going to get to that, which is that I think money and incentives and lack of incentives is one of the reasons why schools, both on the supply and on the demand side, have been pretty much impervious to change over the last 120 years. I mean, this will put a lot of schools, yes, I think will put a lot of schools out of, and maybe colleges, small colleges, out of business. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball on all of this, but certainly the financial model. I mean, Tom, both you and I are the product of fee-paying, if you want to use the word elite, schools and universities. And I've spent my whole career in those schools with no apologies, but they're not the solution to the education for society at large. And the extreme discrepancy in the accessibility to elite schools is a real problem. And I know you're in the UK. That's been a big headline in recent months and years. So I think there will need to be a new financial model for schools, for schooling, and I'm speaking now more in the private sector. There's no question that there will be. And this is where the online education can come into play. And it's a shock to the system. But those of us who've been in education have been to so many education conferences with various futurists speaking about this, that I begin to go to sleep when they start talking about the future of learning and so on and so forth. In fact, this, I think, will be the shock to the system that says, do we change? Are there ways to have greater, really good learning experiences at lesser cost, at greater accessibility across the socioeconomic divide? I think these questions will be now asked with much greater urgency than they ever were before.
Right. So I guess we've got a question coming in actually from Jennifer Chang, whose daughter is currently at HKIS, and she's asking, it will be impossible for her youngest to go to her baby playgroup school. They're doing online learning for the older children. What's going to happen to the long term to these elite schools, including colleges?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think schools with reasonable finances can weather, and families with reasonable means can weather one rotten year. I'm not so concerned about, I think in the big picture, this academic year, it's not that big a deal in terms of the hoops you have to jump through with exams, with universities. I'm going to be on a webinar in a few days in terms of university admissions and so on and so forth. Even with loss of learning, even if there's some net loss of learning for a few months in 1 year, that's not, to my mind, that's not that big a deal. Longer term, I mean, there's going to be a lot more need for fiscal responsibility and accountability. I don't know. I'm not an economist, but I know that with the oversaturated UK market in private schools, and I think it's true in parts of Australia, although they're partially subsidized, and in the US and the sort of smaller colleges. I mean, I don't know, but I would be surprised if many of them didn't go out of business. Schools like HKIS are going to be well resourced to take a long, hard look at I'm sure plenty of students are staying at HKIS next year in Hong Kong. But what model of learning and at what cost, what price point, I think will be looked at with greater sharpness.
Okay, but the interesting thing is, speaking as a former headmaster, head teacher of two very eminent schools around the world, you're saying parents should not stress wildly about the short-term impact of this year, these few months.
Oh, no way. No way. How could that be? I mean, I know how that is, but look, if we were serious about guarding against loss of learning, we wouldn't have 3-month or 2-month summer vacations. That's been another sort of topic of conversation for the last 30 years or 50 years in schools. No, and kids are very resilient, and there will be ways to deal with that. Will we know that they're all on grade level coming in September? For me, because I'm going to actually be going into Shenzhen for to take over for 1 year in Shenzhen at the Avenue School. For me, the question is, what is the shape of the next school year going to be? Because we keep, watching the news, we keep having the creeping horizon going 2 or 3 weeks or a month or 2 months, depending on who you're listening to having things open. I have no idea what the shape of things is going to be for the next year. But look, I would encourage parents to be patient with all of this. Understand that, as we know, parenting is a long haul, a 14, 15, 16-year journey from age 3 to age 18 is a long haul. And beyond that, I have no crystal ball.
Right. What are some of the benefits that you could see to this? The online element has a real benefit to it. Paul Heath from Brazil, whose child actually is at the children at the Sao Paulo Avenue School, is saying that he feels like he can get 85%. If 85% of the experience can be replaced online, is a solution to make college 1 year on campus and 3 years online.
Well, potentially. This is why I find this to be, we're not going to be doing a little polite dance around this question in the future. These are real opportunities. And, when we talk about experiential learning and breaking down the class day, from based on bus schedules, so that you have to be in class at school for 8 hours of the day, and that's just because of how the buses work and how it's been for 120 years. This is potentially cutting the Gordian knot on where do you need to be physically present in school. And I love this. This is breaking down in a very messy way. This is breaking down the walls between school, which is a place where you're supposed to go to learn for about 8 hours a day, and non-school, which is where life happens. And this is breaking down those walls. And yes, there are various legal issues and various child safety issues and so on and so forth that have to be taken into account. But until we get into the deadly game of having to get into college and university in the final 2 years of secondary school, schools are full of people and teachers who want to be finding new ways of learning and demonstrating learning and credentialing learning and looking at new ways of assessment. And so this could change. This could be the kind of thing that, with bold schools or schools forced into through necessity, could change the shape of the school day, or how much needs to be how much needs to be physically present within the four walls of the school, and how much can be done. Look, this whole thing of individualized learning is paced at the students' personal pace is something that is well served by what's happening now. So it's messy, but it's going to create these possibilities that until now we've just been talking about in conferences.
So this goes to the heart of what we were talking about before, which is the advantages of what's going to come. The good news out of this crisis basically is going to be a fundamental questioning, as Paul Heath's, 85% of the experience can be replicated. Why are we even paying money for all these other parts of it? A fundamental question of what is the purpose of education? What are you trying to get out of it? And therefore, how can we do it differently, deliver it more efficiently, deliver it better?
Right. Do it more efficiently, do it better. Where does it take place? What's the financial model for it? Absolutely. And I know Andy Williams and the team in Sao Paulo are doing a great job there with this. And so I'm actually, with all due compassion for the families who are not, well connected, and where this is a real issue of the socioeconomic divide, which again, this has to be focused on as well. In educational terms, I think in the years to come, it will be something that we're building on. Yeah.
So if we take this crisis in the right way, it will fundamentally question all of these elements.
Yes, that's right. As long as parents who have been cooped up with their children and who haven't necessarily been as thrilled with the daily experiences when their children are physically at school, don't just sort of become naysayers about it. Have to keep an open mind.
Right. I think that teachers have gone up in people's estimation tremendously as parents have taken on trying to run their little home schools.
Right, right. I had a very brief. Remember the year we met in Vietnam? I had a very we had a very brief sort of self-isolation experience in Hanoi with homeschooling, and then that part of it didn't work. It's a little bit like this.
So even as a headmaster, your own homeschooling experience with your own children it's not easy.
That was a disaster. Yeah, or one of the really bad decisions we made.
Great. Okay. Any last thoughts in terms of where we are right now and what we'll see ahead, either in the months or in the years, from all the conversations you're having with global educators, universities, and others so deeply involved in education?
Oh, gee, Tom, I mean, because none of us has a crystal ball, what few insights and little wisdom I have to share, I've already shared. So I think patience is the name of the game, and believing that children are really resilient, and that the short term, the sort of 6-month kind of horizon, other than the personal frustrations one feels, will come out in the wash. And I'm sure that the universities and the exams and so forth will find ways to accommodate this. They're bigger things in life, so we need to look beyond that. Yeah. So no final words of wisdom, but thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining.